Okay, and now I would like to discuss muskox. And actually, muskox are more closely related to sheep and goats than they are oxen. They're still a member of the family Bovidae, but they're given their own subfamily Caprinae, and their genus is Ovibos. Muskox were indigenous to Alaska. There was a muskox in Alaska for tens of thousands of years, but they went extinct in the late 19th century. We don't know for sure the reasons why, but probably the two major reasons why they went extinct is it seemed like there was a change in climate during that period. And there was a general decline in all terrestrial herbivores in Alaska at the time. And we think it was associated with the climate, whether it was summer or winter, temperature or precipitation, we just don't know. But also we introduced firearms and commercial hunting. So I think those two variables led to the extinction of muskox. And also another factor is the behavior of muskox when they're disturbed. They don't run away. When they're disturbed, they gather up in a bunch and hold their ground. And which works well for some predators, like wolves, but for other predators, like men with rifles, that particular behavior doesn't bode well for survival. So for whatever reasons, the indigenous population of muskox went extinct in the late 19th century. Well, in 1930, we reintroduced muskox into Alaska. We went and gathered up animals from East Greenland and brought them actually here to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. These animals were then moved out to Nunivak Island, and the population did very well. Population increased to between 700 and 800 animals. And then the animals from Nunivak herd were used as seed stock for other areas in Alaska, the Seward Peninsula, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, Wrangell Island, and even some of them were introduced to the Taimyr Peninsula in Russia. Well, there was a fellow, John Teal. He had this idea that we needed to domesticate muskox and use them in the rural villages of Alaska as a meat and fiber cottage industry. That was his mission. So he began a program, a domestication program here at the university, because he felt domestic muskox made much more sense than introducing domestic ungulates more adapted to temperate climates than sheep or cattle or goats. His idea was, let's domesticate an animal that has been adapted to the north to feed people and to clothe people. But unfortunately, there was a tad bit of headbutting with other researchers at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and so there was a parting of the ways. So John Teal took his muskox operation and moved it to Unalakleet in 1976 and 1977, and later those animals were moved to Talkeetna. And in 1986, that domestic muskox operation was moved to the Matanuska Valley near Palmer, where it remains today. And those animals are used mainly for kiviot production. The kiviot is the underwool of the muskox. It's a very valuable and beautiful product used to make garments. Now, and you will probably know my bias, I want to talk about reindeer, Tarandus, beautiful animals. Reindeer, now we don't know when reindeer were domesticated. Reindeer are domestic livestock. They are not wildlife. People often compare them to caribou and say, oh, they're cousins of caribou. No, they are two completely different animals. One's a wildlife species, the other has gone through the domestication process. Reindeer, it is a domesticated livestock animal. It has all the characteristics of a domesticated animal, like we talked about in previous lectures. We noted the physical changes, the color variability, the shortening of the jaw, a bulged forehead, and shorter legs. Reindeer are a domestic animal. Often I hear them referred to as semi-domesticated animals. Being semi-domesticated is like being semi-pregnant. You either are or you aren't. Reindeer have gone through the domestication process, so they are domestic animals. People get confused because they can be managed in different ways. Oftentimes reindeer are just loosely herded across the landscape, and they may be a little bit wilder because they're not socialized to people very well. And so because they're managed that way, people describe more of the management system as semi-domestic rather than the animal. But reindeer are domestic animals. And when this domestication process happened, we don't know. There's one camp that believes it happened a long time ago, over 10,000 years ago, about the time we domesticated the dog. But unfortunately, there really is no archaeological evidence to support that. You know, we don't find bones, shorter jaw bones, to really prove the domestication process happened a long time ago. There's another camp that believe reindeer were one of the last animals to be domesticated, maybe between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. And reindeer were domesticated through a herding process. We selected for animals that were easily herdable, amenable to herding. And that is they stay together as a group, which is very different than caribou. If you disturb caribou, they all run off in different directions. But if you disturb a group of reindeer, they come together as a group. We've selected for that behavior because it makes them very easy to move around the landscape in a very tight group. And reindeer are still undergoing through that selection process. To this day, reindeer peoples all across the world, if there's a reindeer that tends to not stay in the group or isn't very easily herdable, those animals are culled and go into the stew pot. And so actually we get an animal that, very much like sheep, that we can establish a communication system with them very, very quickly. Because a reindeer, to increase your survivability, is you end up doing what your herder wants you to do. And so reindeer get it figured out very quickly what you want them to do. Reindeer are distributed all across the circumpolar north. We have different ecotypes of reindeer. We have the tundra ecotype and the woodland ecotype, more associated with the boreal forest. There are likely two reindeer were likely domesticated in different areas of the world. We believe some reindeer were domesticated in the Siberia, Mongolia area by the Samoan people, and also we think reindeer were domesticated by the Sami people. in Fennoscandia. But regardless of where they were domesticated, reindeer became very important for the development, establishment of many northern cultures in the circumpolar north. In different people around the circumpolar north use reindeer for very different purposes. Reindeer are used as milk animals. Some people use reindeer for milk. Some use them for transportation. They both train reindeer to pull a sled, but they also ride them. They make special saddles for reindeer, and those reindeer that have been bred for riding, they are a much larger, bigger boned, larger frame animal that is very good for riding. And then some reindeer were selected for meat production. So we have various groups of people selecting for animals for slightly different purposes, and this led to the development of different breeds of reindeer. So a reindeer is not a reindeer. There are different breeds of reindeer. Some breeds were selected as a riding animal or transportation, and these typically, like I said, are larger statured reindeer than the ones for milk production or for pulling a sled. We have various breeds across the Eurasian continent. We have the Netzi breed, the Even breed, a Venki breed, and the Tungus breed, which I've had great fortune of seeing those reindeer. They're very large. They have a morphology look very much like a draft horse. They do not look like a caribou at all. They look more like a draft horse. And that's the breed that is used for riding around. You throw a saddle on them, you jump on them, and you just go from place to place just like you would a horse. The reindeer that were introduced to Alaska are the Chukotkin breed. And the Chukotkin breed has some very unique characteristics. The Chukotkin breed was developed for meat production. So Chukotkin reindeer have a very high muscle-to-bone ratio. They are the Angus, the Angus reindeer of the Range Fur world. We have a research herd here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. You can go look at those animals, and they have that very square Angus shape. They were selected for eating. The Chukotkin people, they traveled around on foot. So they selected for an animal that didn't wander off very much. They stayed in one place. The Chukotkin reindeer show a very strong sight fidelity. You put them in one place, they stay there, which we will talk about later. That worked very well with the Alaska Grazing Act in 1927. We could establish a reindeer range. We had this animal that doesn't wander around very much. We can put it on this range, and it stays right there. But there's a problem with that particular behavior, is they tend to overgraze. So we've selected for developed an animal that requires management, that requires herding, requires the use of a rotational grazing strategy. We need to move them from place to place, otherwise they will overgraze that area.